Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Naram Chaiva Narottama. Devim Saraswatim Vyasam.
Ishtaprayeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki. Read the translations together. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the very means of conquest, one should offer respectful obeisances unto the personality of God, of Narayana, unto Narayan Rishi, the supermost human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author. By regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam, and by rendering of service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed. And loving service unto the personality of God is praised. Hare Krishna, good morning everyone. So today we're going to be covering chapter 4 of Canto 1. Before we start that, does anybody remember what we covered last time? I'm going to look for the book real quick. Mother Nanda was giving the class. Okay, if nobody remembers, maybe we can review the last few verses before we move on to chapter 4. Okay, so if we can start from chapter 3, last few verses, starting at text 40. Chapter 3, yeah, text 40. Review the last few verses before we move on to chapter 4. So initially when the first canto was started, the sages of Naimisharanya asked 6 questions to Sutta Goswami. And these questions have been starting to get answered. One of the questions that was answered last class, Mother Nanda gave that class, was where have the religious principles gone now that Krishna has left this world? And the answer was Srimad Bhagavatam, and last few verses talk about the Srimad Bhagavatam. And I wanted to start there so that we can continue from where we left off last time. So text 40. Does anybody want to read from 40 to the end of chapter 3? Maybe we can. Oh, yes, please.
This Srimad Bhagavatam is a literary incarnation of God, and it is compiled by Srila Vyasadeva, the incarnation of God. It is meant for the ultimate good of all people, and it is all successful, all blissful, and all perfect. Sri Vyasadeva delivered it to his son, who is the most respected among the self-realized, after extracting the cream of all Vedic literatures and histories of the universe. Sukadev Goswami, the son of Vyasadeva, in his turn delivered the Bhagavatam to the great Emperor Pariksit, who sat surrounded by sages on the bank of the Ganges, awaiting death without taking food or drink. This Bhagavat Purana is as brilliant as the sun, and it has arisen just after the departure of Lord Krishna to his own abode, accompanied by religion, knowledge, etc. Persons who have lost their vision due to the dense darkness of ignorance in the age of Kali should get light from this Purana. O learned Brahmins, when Sukadev Goswami recited Bhagavatam there, in the presence of Emperor Pariksit, I heard him with rapt attention, and thus, by his mercy, I learned the Bhagavatam from that great and powerful sage. Now I shall try to make you hear the very same thing as I learned it from him, and as I have realized it.
Thank you, Kiara. Okay, so that was essentially the last few verses of chapter 3. Again, like I mentioned, this was answering the questions of the sages. The 6th question, where have the religious principles gone? So even though Krishna has left this world, the Srimad Bhagavatam is still here, which is the text we're reading right now, which is where the religious principles are. This is where we can seek salvation. So continuing now from chapter 4, we'll cover chapter 4 through text 1 through 13. And maybe like we can take turns reading, and I'll stop after a few, maybe one verse or two verse, and make a point. So we can start from text 1 and go around.
Sukadev said, on hearing Suta Goswami speak thus, Shaunaka Muni, who was the elderly learned leader of all the rishis engaged in that prolonged sacrificial ceremony, congratulated Suta Goswami by addressing him as follows.
Text 2.
Shaunaka said, O Suta Goswami, you are the most fortunate and respected of all those who can speak and recite. Please relate the pious message of Srimad Bhagavatam, which was spoken by the great and powerful sage Sukadev Goswami.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll pause here. I wanted to make a point here that if you read the verse, it says Suta Suta Mahabhao, which is like saying the name of Suta Goswami 2 times. The sages are very ecstatic and they want to hear about the Bhagavatam. And so in this ecstasy, they're saying Suta Goswami's name again. Please, Suta Goswami, please tell us, narrate to us about this Bhagavatam. So like for the next maybe 1 or 2 verses, we can try to pay attention to the mood of the sages as they ask questions and as they present their questions to Suta Goswami. Can we go to the next verse? Text 3.
In what period and at what place was this first begun? And why was this taken up? From where did Krishna Vaipayana Vyas, the great sage, get the inspiration to compile this literature?
Thank you. Okay, so here, this is their first question they're asking. Well, not the first question. They've already asked questions, and those questions have been answered. But they don't just stop there. They want to know. They're hungry for more knowledge. And so they, to invoke like the ecstasy, the nectar of hearing about these pastimes, they're asking more questions. And this is, you'll notice this generally throughout the Bhagavatam is the theme of asking questions. It's not just, okay, you answered my 6 questions. Okay, I'm happy, I'm satisfied. But they're eager to know more. So whenever there's saintly people or sages who come to visit, maybe we can try to learn from them and also ask these questions. Because if you notice, maybe a lot of us have tried to share Krishna consciousness with new people, even people who come visit. And sometimes when somebody's really eager to know and they ask questions, they want to know, oh, what is this and what are you guys doing here? Then you want to share more. And that the spiritual knowledge just gets churned and you learn more and more. So there's never really any question that is dumb to ask, but just asking questions can really churn the nectar and help us, and at the same time, help us gain knowledge. In this case, they weren't necessarily, they were looking for knowledge, but they're also really eager to hear because they wanted to hear about Krishna's pastimes and they wanted to hear about the Bhagavatam, they wanted to hear about the devotees of Krishna because this is what really satisfies the soul. So if we have questions and we can ask questions related to these topics, then it can keep satisfying us and at the same time encouraging spiritual conversations. Okay, so we can keep going. And as we move forward, again, you can pay attention to how they're asking the questions and the mood of the sages. So text 4, translation.
His Vyasadev's son was a great devotee, an equibalanced monist whose mind was always concentrated in monism. He was transcendental to mundane activities, but being unexposed, he appeared like an ignorant person.
Okay. So for this one, I want to actually touch on the purport, if we can open that one up and read a little bit about that. This next few verses, we're going to start talking about Sukadev Goswami, who's the original speaker of the Bhagavatam. So this Bhagavatam was spoken by Sukadev Goswami to Maharaj Pariksit. And the next few verses, the sages are asking about how that happened, and they ask about Sukadev Goswami, and they'll ask about Pariksit Maharaj. So this, his Vyasadev's son, is talking about Sukadev Goswami. So you can read the purport.
Srila Sukadev Goswami was a liberated soul, and thus he remained always alert and not to be trapped by the illusory energy. In the Bhagavad Gita, this alertness is very lucidly explained. The liberated soul and the conditioned soul have different engagements. The liberated soul is always engaged in the progressive path of spiritual attainment, which is something like a dream for the conditioned soul. The conditioned soul cannot imagine the actual engagements of the liberated soul. While the conditioned soul thus dreams about spiritual engagements, the liberated soul is awake. Similarly, the engagement of a conditioned soul appears to be a dream for the liberated soul. A conditioned soul and a liberated soul may apparently be on the same platform, but factually they are differently engaged, and their attention is always alert, either in sense enjoyment or in self-realization. The conditioned soul is absorbed in matter, whereas the liberated soul is completely indifferent to matter. This indifference is explained as follows.
Thank you. Okay, so here, this is the first purport talking about the qualifications of Sukadev Goswami. He's a liberated soul, and we'll hear more about his qualifications. But whenever we hear something, no matter what it is, even in the academic world, it's good to know who we are hearing from, and it's good to know that the source is bona fide. So when we hear this Bhagavatam, we're not directly hearing from Sukadev Goswami, which is coming to us through Srila Prabhupada. So in that way, we can trust from seeing the character of Sukadev Goswami that this knowledge is actually very special. This isn't just some bogus knowledge out there. And, like I was saying, like in the academic world, we see the references. Here we can see this knowledge where it's coming from also. So let's hear more about the qualities of Sukadev Goswami in the next text.
While Srila Vyasadeva was following his son, beautiful young damsels who were bathing naked covered their bodies with cloth, although Sri Vyasadeva himself was not naked. But they had not done so when his son had passed. The sage inquired about this, and the young ladies replied that his son was purified, and when looking at them made no distinction between male and female, but the sage made such distinctions.
Thank you. And we can go to the purport of that one as well.
In the Bhagavad Gita, it is said that a learned sage looks equally on a learned and gentle brahmana, a kandala, a dog, or a cow, due to his spiritual vision. Srila Sukadeva Goswami attained that stage, thus he did not see a male or a female. He saw all living entities in different dress. The ladies who were bathing could understand the mind of a man simply by studying his demeanor. Just as by looking at a child, one can understand how innocent he is. Sukadevi Goswami was a young boy, 16 years old, and therefore all parts of his body were developed. He was naked also, and so were the ladies. And because Sukadevi Goswami was transcendental to sex relations, he appeared very innocent. The ladies, by their special qualifications, could sense this at once, and therefore they were not very concerned about him. But when his father passed, the ladies quickly dressed. The ladies were exactly like his children or grandchildren. Yet they reached to the presence of Vyasadeva, according to the social custom, because Srila Vyasadeva played the part of a householder. A householder has to distinguish between a male and a female, otherwise he cannot be a householder. One should therefore attempt to know the distinction between body and soul without any attachment for male or female. As long as the distinction is there, one should not try to become a sannyasi like Sukadevi Goswami. At least theoretically, one must be convinced that a living entity is neither male nor female. The outward dress is made of matter by material nature to attract the opposite sex, and thus keep one entangled in material existence. A liberated soul is above this perverted distinction. He does not distinguish between one living being and another. For him, they are all one and the same spirit. The perfection of this spiritual vision is a liberated stage, and Srila Sukadevi Goswami attained that stage. Srila Vyasadeva was also in the transcendental stage, but because he was in the householder's life, he did not pretend to be a liberated soul as a matter of custom.
Thank you. Okay, so here it's going more into the detail about the qualifications of Sukadev Goswami. He was on the liberated state, like we talked about. So he didn't make any distinction on the bodily platform, seeing the spirit soul. In Bhagavad Gita, it says, a sage looks equally on a learned and gentle brahmana, dog eater, dog. So he had that spiritual vision. And so, the story, like he's talking about here, is there was some ladies naked bathing, and they could see that he didn't see that. He wasn't on that material platform. So they were completely comfortable being themselves. He was on the spiritual platform, so he was only seeing the spirit soul. It says Srila Vyasadeva was also on that platform, but because he was in the householder part of his life, just so that social customs could be followed, he made such distinctions, or it was understood that he made such distinctions so that they cover themselves. But this is basically the glory of Sukadev Goswami, that he didn't see the body. He didn't see male or female. And, if somebody is on that platform, then this whole world is just a different place. If you see, right now in the world, there's so much discrimination based on the body, male, female, different races. But if we can just elevate the people to the spiritual understanding, like we're not this body, then a lot of these problems can actually go away. So just spiritual knowledge has so much depth, and Sukadev Goswami was on that platform. I'm gonna, before we continue, pause and see if anybody has any comments or questions. Yes, please.
Besides being able to see past the difference in the human race, is this still the same with like the animal kingdom, where we see the Paramatma spirit and like all living entities like the squirrels and cats in the morning?
Yes, that's true, because in the verse it says dog eater, a dog or a cow. So it basically means every living entity, including animals, plants. Okay. Thank you. We can move on to text 6. What?
How was he, Srila Sukadeva, the son of Vyas, recognized by the citizens when he entered the city of Hastinapur, now Delhi, after wandering in the provinces of Kuru and Jangala, appearing like a madman, dumb and retarded?
Thank you. So here, they're saying that Sukadev Goswami externally looked like a madman, dumb, and retarded. And, he was also naked, so he wasn't like covered up. And so if any of us were to see somebody like this walking on the street, at least I wouldn't assume, this is a spiritual person. Let me offer my respectful obeisances. Let me hear from them. So how are they going to recognize that? Sukadev Goswami is a great saint, but externally he's looking like however he's looking. Externally he's not looking very qualified spiritually to be a person to seek spiritual knowledge from. I think it's really interesting to know here that it's just to be careful, because by externals we don't really know what and where somebody is at internally. And the way here, externally, he was seeming like a dumb and retarded person. Sometimes there's also cases where externally people may appear like a great saintly person, and they may not be internally. So based on this external situations, markings, it's hard to determine where somebody is at spiritually. So just by looking at the body, that is not the way to make the distinction. What Prabhupada says in the purport is that the way that they recognized him was the way he spoke. So when you hear somebody speak, then you can know, okay, this is like where they're at, this is their spiritual knowledge, this is where they're sharing. They say like you never know a fool until they speak, until they say something. So the way to know a spiritual person is by their speech, by how they talk or what they talk about, what their conversation is like, not necessarily how their body looks from the outside. Yes, Prabhu.
In that regard, the actual safety net appears to be that in Vedic culture, persons are taught how, from a very young age, how to be respectful of all sorts of people. And in this way, avoid the possibility of making some offense. And then also, when that opportunity for the presence of someone qualified is there, then they're already cultured in how to offer proper respect. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. So we can continue. Text 7.
How did it so happen that King Pariksit met this great sage, making it possible for this great transcendental essence of the Vedas, Bhagavatam, to be sung to him?
Okay. So now we are going to hear more questions about Maharaj Pariksit, who is hearing the Bhagavatam. So not only are we hearing about the qualities of the speaker, we're also going to hear about the qualities of the listener. So both are important. Let's continue.
He, Sukadev Goswami, was accustomed to stay at the door of a householder only long enough for a cow to be milked, and he did this just to sanctify the residence.
It is said that Maharaj Pariksit is a great first-class devotee of the Lord, and that his birth and activities are all wonderful. Please tell us about him.
Okay, so I wanted to pause here. It's saying that Sukadev Goswami only stayed at a householder's home just enough for them to milk the cow. And the purpose was so that they could, mainly enlighten the householder and share some spiritual knowledge. And they didn't want to stay too long to become entangled in the householder part of life. So how is it? Maharaj Pariksit, on the other hand, was a householder. He was a leader, and he had a kingdom to rule, and he had many opulences. How is it that, he got association of Sukadev Goswami? That's their question, because generally Sukadev Goswami wouldn't spend so much time with a king and somebody who's absorbed in the material way of life.
He was a great emperor and possessed of all the opulences of his acquired kingdom. He was so exalted that he was increasing the prestige of the Pandu dynasty. Why did he give up everything to sit down on the bank of the Ganga and fast until death?
So here they're making the point that, at least, he didn't give up everything because he was depressed and he didn't have a kingdom, he didn't have opulences. He had actually everything. He had all the opulences, he had a kingdom, everybody was happy with him, but still he decided to give up all that he had and just, fast till death, hearing the Bhagavatam. So whatever he was doing, his past material life was less significant compared to listening to the Bhagavatam. It's essentially what I get from this question. But also that, he didn't give it up out of frustration. So why did he actually give it up? They want to know. Next question.
He was such a great emperor that all his enemies would come and bow down at his feet and surrender all their wealth for their own benefit. He was full of youth and strength, and he possessed kingly opulences that were difficult to give up. Why did he want to give up everything, including his life?
Those who are devoted to the cause of the personality of Godhead live only for the welfare, development, and happiness of others. They do not live for any selfish interest. So even though the Emperor Pariksit was free from all attachment to worldly possessions, how could he give up his mortal body, which was shelter for others?
Thank you. So we're giving different reasons why somebody may give up their body, and they're wondering how come he didn't give it up, or why would he give it up because of this or that. One of them was it says all of his enemies would come down and bow to him. So why did he give everything up, including his life? He didn't need to. Then it talks about not just on the material side, but on the spiritual side. As a devotee of the Lord Maharaj Pariksit, he lived not for himself, but for others' benefit. He lived for his citizens and for giving shelter to other living entities as a Kshatriya king. So in that sense, he didn't really have a right to give up his body. It wasn't for him, it was for others' benefit. So why would he give up something and, just leave this world? So that's something that they're curious about, because they know the qualifications of Maharaj Pariksit. They know they've given the qualifications materially, that he had all opulences, he had a kingdom, he didn't have any enemies because they would bow down to him, but also spiritually, he had all good qualities. He was a devotee of the Lord. He was giving shelter to so many people. He was in his kingdom. Actually, there was a case where a cow was going to be slaughtered, but he completely stopped that. So there was no injustice in his kingdom, and everybody was really, really happy. So imagining being in a kingdom where Maharaj Pariksit is the ruler, if you're a citizen, to hear that, this person just left, that must be very devastating. To know, okay, this person was my shelter, everything was good, there was no injustice, everything, everybody was happy. How could he just leave? And so we're going to hear more about this, but we've heard that Maharaj Pariksit actually had a curse, and so in that way, he had only 10 days to leave this planet, and so in those days, he was just sitting and dedicating his life to hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam. That's also one of his great qualities. So if you think, many times in this world, people ask, what is your last wish? Sometimes when people are dying, you can ask them, hey, what is one thing you want to do? Or what is your bucket list right before you die? And there's different things on that list. Maybe I want to go here, travel to this place, or do this one thing that I really want to do. But what is the most valuable thing to do if we had a limited amount of time is what Maharaj Pariksit is showing us. When he was given that time notice, 10 days, he completely, left his material kingdom to just focus on hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam. Because when you're about to die, the priorities of your life shift, and only what's most important, that's what you want to do. That's what you want to, spend your time doing. So for him, Srimad Bhagavatam was just so valuable that he left even eating, sleeping, just absorbed in hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam. So that is actually his qualification, that when he had that death notice, he didn't engage in other sense gratificatory activities. He knew what was most beneficial to him and to others, and that was, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. So sometimes we can also reflect, we don't know when we're going to die. I mean, he got a notice, but we don't know when that moment will be. So if that moment were to come, what is something that I would prioritize, or what is something that I would be doing more of? So thinking like that can help us set our priorities more straight sometimes. If there is something high on that list, maybe it's good to not just keep procrastinating that. And I think all of us know in this room that one thing that we really want to do is focus on our spiritual life. We have a very limited a time of doing that. So please, I'm saying to myself and to all of us, take this opportunity and let's just put sincerity into showing up every day and practicing our spiritual life, because we never know when that moment is going to come, just like it did for Maharaj Pariksit. So we can also, we don't have a death notice, but we can also, hear the Bhagavatam and get absorbed and take full advantage in that way. And we have one verse left. So let's read that last text. Anybody can read. Yeah.
We know that you are expert in the meaning of all subjects, except some portions of the Vedas, and thus you can clearly explain the answers to all the questions we have just put to you.
Okay. So this is the last before Sutta Goswami starts speaking. So the sages, they've asked their questions, they're eager to know, and at the end they say, you're the right person to ask because you would know the answers to these questions. They know the qualifications of Sutta Goswami, just like we heard about the qualifications of Sukadev Goswami. So this knowledge, we ask questions to a person who's qualified. So they know that he's qualified, and so they're asking. And I think that's also something to keep in mind, is should ask questions and try to learn more about these spiritual topics, but also be careful and know who we are hearing from, knowing that we're asking the right person. So this Sutta Goswami was extremely qualified. He had heard it from Sukadev Goswami directly, so now he's able to pass on that knowledge in disciplic succession so that there's no broken knowledge. And we know that the knowledge is transcendental and it's coming directly from where it was heard, the Srimad Bhagavatam. I think I'll pause here now and see if anybody has any thoughts, questions. Anthony? Sorry. Oh my God. Oliver. Oh my God. Yeah, Johnny.
So I had heard that at some time, all Vedic knowledge will be erased in maybe at the end of Kali Yuga. I was just wondering if anybody could answer that question. It's like, because it reminded me when you were saying how important, the disciplic succession and learning from people who have the correct knowledge and wisdom and understanding, like solidified, but how at some point it won't even be on earth anymore.
Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Yes, go Priti.
So I'm not sure, Jonathan, but maybe you heard about, so basically we're in the beginning stages of Kali Yuga, and Lord Chaitanya's movement descends, and then there's almost like a mini Satya Yuga within the Kali Yuga, which lasts for 10,000 years, I believe. But after that, then it's just going to be full-blown Kali Yuga, where people's bodies become even smaller and smaller, and it's explained that fruits, the skin and the seeds become so big that there's almost no flesh to the fruits. The weather will become extremely intolerable, and yes, there will be pretty much no Vedic culture at all, and no spiritual knowledge available, until eventually the Lord comes in the form of Kalki and just liberates everyone with his sword. So maybe that's what you are thinking of. But even though we're in Kali Yuga right now, but there's lots of spiritual mercy available.
I saw a couple other hands raised.
That we know that you're expert in meaning of all subjects except some portions of the Vedas. What portions of the Vedas did Sukadev Goswami was he not expert in? Does it say anything in the purport?
I mean, it might. I'm not sure exactly what those portions are, but I assumed that maybe he's not so versed. We can read it more to know. It's like some of the materialistic aspects of the Vedas, because he's well versed in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Yeah, karma kanda. Yeah.
It does explain in the purport a little bit. It says that there are the Brahmanas and the Parivrajaka Acharyas, and I think it's basically saying that Sutta is more of a Parivrajaka Acharya, explaining transcendental subject matter and not so much all the ritualistic things. And it says that you might not know how to pronounce all the mantras in a perfect ritualistic way. So maybe that's what it's referring to.
Yeah, thank you.
Reminds me of like when people used to ask Srila Prabhupada, is a spiritual master supposed to be expert in everything or just like spiritual topics? Why not throw someone shared this and we call a control with that. Prabhupada said that spiritual master is expert in the spiritual sciences. Not necessarily you should ask him about material aspects of life, like where should I invest in for stock market, and he won't be able to give all those predictions. Like he is expert in the spiritual sciences.
Yeah. I think I also remember, like, if you know the purpose behind the Vedas, then you know all of the Vedas. So Sukadev Goswami, he knew the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the essence. So it doesn't necessarily have to know all the technical details because he knew the essence of the scriptures.
I have a question about the timeline of this all.
Okay.
So if I understand right, Srimad Bhagavatam comes right after the Battle of Kurukshetra, right after Bhagavad Gita. So a few questions. One, when did Shanaka Rishi, when did Sutta Goswami explain to the rishis at Naimisharanya Srimad Bhagavatam? When did Shukadeva Goswami give it to Maharaj Pariksit? And the third question, I get those are the questions. When was Bhagavatam spoken by Sutta and Shukadeva Goswamis?
I don't know the exact timeline, but chronologically, Sukadev Goswami spoke it to Maharaj Pariksit, and then later Sutta Goswami was there. He heard that, and then he spoke it to the sages in Naimisharanya. Does anybody have more details on the exact time of when that happened? Okay. Yeah, cursed Maharaj Pariksit. So the first when Sukadev Goswami.
We often say how, everything is 5,000 years ago. Like 5,000 years ago, the Bhagavatam, 5,000 years ago, Krishna left, everything. So based on that, I would say there wasn't much gap. So the Mahabharata war ended, right? And then the Pandavas did rule for a good number of years. I think it was like 50 years or something like that, or maybe even 100 or something. And then they ruled, they retired, Pariksit Maharaj was on the throne. And then and then he ruled for some time. Then Shukadeva Goswami spoke to Pariksit Maharaj. And then after some time, so it must have been it's just a guess, but it's probably like a short period of time after Sukadev talked to Pariksit, after like a short period, because everything's 5,000 years ago. So it could be a few years or maybe 100 years, something like that, but that's just an estimation. But I would say it's not much time lapse between Sukadev Goswami speaking and Sutta Goswami speaking. And also, actually, as a matter of fact, to make it more complicated, Lord Balaram actually was there, right? Ramaharshana Sutta, he killed Ramaharshana Sutta. So this assembly was already there. And that's another thing, like with these sages meeting, it's not like a quick thing, they do yagyas or whatever else, or like, because they weren't necessarily doing yagyas, but there's always more to it than just like they didn't just sit and speak right away. There was more to it. There's some ceremonies. Maharshana Sutta was welcomed, and he was gonna be on the Vyasasana and so forth. So more or less everything was 5,000 years ago. It's a little bit of time periods in between, and there's definitely some overlap because when Balaram went there, the war hadn't happened yet, I believe, right? Or it was right after the war. Yeah, thank you. So basically, yeah, as she said, the chronological, we know the basic chronology with some few years. Yeah. Yeah.
You have a follow?
Maharaj Pariksit he's the grandson of the Pandavas? Okay. So, all right, thanks.
Okay.
Thought of something. So whose son was Maharaj Pariksit? Who was his father?
Abhimanyu. We have a question. Okay. If nobody has a question, really quickly, I wanted to go to text 1.1.3. It also talks about 1.1.3. It also talks about Sukadev Goswami. And I think it's a really nice verse talking about the qualifications of Sukadev Goswami. You can go down to the translation. Okay. You can read it. O expert and thoughtful men, relish Srimad Bhagavatam, the mature fruit of the desire tree of Vedic literatures. It emanated from the lips of Sri Sukadev Goswami. Therefore, this fruit has become even more tasteful, although its nectarian juice is already relishable for all, including liberated souls. So this is talking about Srimad Bhagavatam is already nectar, but because it's spoken by Sukadev Goswami, it's even more nectarian. And generally there's an example given, like if you have a mango, it's very sweet. But then if it's bitten by a parrot, it's even sweeter. So like that, Sukadev Goswami's recitation of the Bhagavatam is even more nectar. And so we're able to get that special condensed nectar of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And it's been even more and more teared down because we get to hear from Srila Prabhupada. So we get like the essence and the nectar of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Just a nice verse talking about Sukadev Goswami, so I thought I'd share. Yes.
This made me also think that we can read Srimad Bhagavatam on our own, and it's already very nectarian, but when we hear it's spoken through the mouth of realized souls like senior devotees, like Srila Prabhupada, or like Prabhupada's disciples or spiritual masters, like it becomes even more like relishable or understandable. Just like it became more tasteful because Sukadev Goswami had tasted the same knowledge. So being handed down the disciplic succession and hearing from realized souls, it makes it also just more easy to understand, and we can assimilate it better.
Yeah, that's true. Also, like you were saying, it makes it very applicable because the sages, they speak for that time and place and circumstances. So if we hear from, the saintly persons who are present right now with us, then they can make the knowledge applicable and relatable to us and the current situation and the current environment, because where we live at right now and the situations we live in is very different from when the Srimad Bhagavatam was spoken. So that's true. It's very important to hear from our current authorities and mentors.
One quick point. Say that usually things get degraded over time, but it seems like Srimad Bhagavatam, as it's being handed down the disciplic succession and we're hearing from more and more realized souls, it's getting like more and more nectarian. Like instead of like over the time being degraded, it's just becoming more relishable because so many realized souls are giving their commentaries on it, giving classes on it, and as we hear them, it's just becoming better over time.
Sure, thank you. It's like a careful mango that is passed down. They said like you go on a ladder and somebody grabs a mango and they carefully hand it down to the next person from a tree down to the person who's standing on the ground. So it's like, or like, I don't know, they're like standing next to each other, but it's described like it's like a mango that's carefully handed to the next person. Okay. Any other last thoughts or comments? Okay. No, thank you all so much. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Mahaprasade Govinde Namo Brahmane Vishnu